O'Neill will now move to question time, and I call Senator Wong.
I seek leave to make a short statement regarding ministerial arrangements.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted,
Thank you.
Minister.
For the information of senators, I table a revised ministry list. The revised list reflects the changes to the ministry announced by the Prime Minister on the 28th of July 2024. Can I first acknowledge the appointment of Senator Makarrata McCarthy to Cabinet as Minister for Indigenous Australians, and I know she will make us proud. Can I also acknowledge the very talented Senator McAllister as Minister for Cities and Minister for Emergency Management. These appointments are well deserved and a reflection of the Prime Minister's confidence in a talented and united Cabinet government that is focused every day on working to deliver better outcomes and more opportunities for all Australians. I would also like to recognise Senator Carol Brown, who has stood aside as Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Senator Brown has always served Labor and Tasmania with principle and dedication, from her leadership in the Tasmanian branch of our party to delivering safer roads and a stronger transport industries Assistance Minister, and I thank her for her contribution and wish her well. As a consequence of the addition of 2 ministers in the Senate, changes have been made to arrangements concerning representation of ministers in the House of Representatives in this chamber, and I seek
order.
We will make sure that you hear as much from him as you deserve. I seek leave to have the revised list incorporated into Hansard.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Senator Wong, will you, on that matter? Senator Birmingham.
President, I seek leave to make a short statement regarding the ministerial arrangements.
Leave is granted. Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, President. I thank the Senate. Can I firstly extend congratulations to Senator McCarthy and Senator McAllister on your appointments to the ministry and to Cabinet in your case, Senator McCarthy. It is a great honour for both of you, and we are pleased to recognise that the Senate is being better recognised in the Albanese ministry after the Scullin government equalling low of Senate representation in the ministry that had been achieved in the first ministry. Senator Brown, we do wish you well in particular and acknowledge your service. I do note the tabling of the revised ministerial arrangements and representational arrangements. President, I note the document is dated the 29th of July. Yet has only just been circulated in the chamber prior to our entering here. Previous ministerial arrangements have been put on the PM&C website with some days' notice before the Senate sits. Whether it's disorganisation or discourtesy is only a matter for the government to answer, but it certainly shows a lack of regard for all non-government senators in their preparation for question time.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. We'll now move to question time, and I'll call Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, President. President, my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Minister, both the Treasurer and the Prime Minister have falsely claimed that government spending is not fuelling inflation, and they have even boasted that they are making the RBA's job easier. On Thursday, when asked why the RBA had attributed a worsening outlook for underlying inflation to government spending, the Prime Minister said that's not what they've said. However, the RBA's statement on monetary policy is crystal clear. Quote, "Public demand is forecast to be stronger than previously expected, reflecting recent public spending announcements by federal and state and territory governments." Minister, why is the Albanese government deliberately misrepresenting and contradicting precisely what the RBA is saying?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
President, what I can say is those on this side and all of the members of the Albanese government, from the Prime Minister through the Cabinet and Ministry and the whole of the caucus, understand how hard things are for so many Australians. We understand how many families and pensioners are doing it tough, and so our first priority has been to work out how we can deliver cost of living relief in a responsible way. And that is why you have seen the range of responsible measures that this government has put in place, including the tax cuts, which are flowing through to workers from the 1st of July. I would take the point that the opposition is making and note this. The opposition is very good at talking about what needs to happen. They're very good at telling people that we actually need to spend less. But do you know what they're not prepared to do? Tell us what they cut. They're not prepared to tell us what they cut. I mean, is it exactly? I mean, is it housing? Is it health? Is it hospitals? Is it pensions? Is it social security? What is it that you would be proposing to cut? We know that Senator Ruston has recently. I'm sorry, I think it was Senator Hume as recently as last week was already again raising concerns about tax cuts. Well, she and Mr Dutton should come forward to the Australian people and say that tell them the truth. Tell them the truth. Are you actually proposing to roll back the tax cuts, which is what you said when they were originally announced? The point is here, we have a situation where the government, across comparable economies worldwide, is dealing with an inflation challenge. We have worked through that and we are continuing to work.
Senator Birmingham, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. I refer the Minister to George Washington University Assistant Professor Stephen Hamilton's statement that, and I quote, "The RBA is notoriously reticent to even come close to criticising the government. The fact they decided to point to high public demand in explaining sticky inflation is the central bank equivalent of screaming from the rooftops what the causes of the problem are." Minister, is the RBA having to scream their concerns from the rooftops because the Prime Minister has his head buried in the sand?
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. Minister Wong.
We are very clear about the priority that we are giving to affording cost of living relief for Australians. And that's because this caucus understands that Australians are doing it tough. And if the proposition from those who purport to be the alternative government is they want to somehow reduce the support that Australians are getting, if they want to roll back tax cuts, if they don't want to proceed with wage increases, if they don't want to proceed with energy bill relief, then they should say that. They should say that. But, they're not prepared to do that, are they? Because they want to have a dishonest debate where they come in and quote academics at us, but have no answer on the issue of cost of living. The only answer you have on cost of living is complaint. That's the only answer they have on cost of living. It's complaint. What they won't do is come in here and tell people if they think government spending should be cut, what are they cutting?
Has expired. Senator Birmingham, second supplementary.
Mr President, prior to the election, Mr Albanese said, "I won't blame someone else. I'll accept responsibility. That's what leaders do." Does the Prime Minister accept, as the Reserve Bank of Australia has said, that public demand is forecast to be stronger than previously expected? Is government spending higher than had been expected and forecast?
Minister Wong.
The Prime Minister absolutely takes responsibility for leading the government through in a time of rising cost of living and takes responsibility for delivering responsible assistance, responsible relief to Australian families and Australian pensioners and more. That is what the Prime Minister is very clear about. He has made it clear it is his and the government's #1 priority to deal with cost of living. We understand how hard it is for so many Australians, but unlike the opposition, we are getting on with the job of providing cost of living relief. We are getting on with the job of ensuring that tax cuts are rolled out, childcare wage increases, Medicare boost, plus cheaper medicines, and of course the energy bill relief. And how many of those policies do you oppose? How many of those policies do you oppose? And how many of those policies would you roll back? Why don't you tell Australians that?
You
won't come in here and actually be honest about what you want to do.
Senator Walsh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. In the 5 weeks since we last sat in this place, the Albanese Labor government has shown yet again that we are working every day to deliver for all Australians and that our #1 priority is delivering cost of living relief. Can the minister please tell the Senate what work the government has been doing? In particular, how is the government helping Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Well, thank you, Senator Walsh. And Senator Walsh, like all of the Labor caucus, understands that Australians are struggling with the cost of living. And that is why the government's #1 priority is to deliver cost of living relief in a responsible way. That is why the government put into place tax cuts, which came into effect on the 1st of July, delivering every Australian taxpayer a tax cut, not just some, but every Australian taxpayer, an additional $62 a week for the average family. We want Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. That's why we've backed a third consecutive pay rise for 2.6 million paid workers. Real wages grew more in the past year than they did in the entire 10 years that those opposite were in power. 10 years that those opposite were in power. And that is why the Albanese government will fund a 15% wage increase for early childhood education and care workers. And that pay rise will be tied to a commitment from childcare centres to limit fee increases. These are just some of the practical ways in which the government is working to address the cost of living pressures that Australians are facing. That is also why every Australian household is getting $300 in energy bill relief, and the government is delivering cheaper medicines, more homes, more quickly, fee-free TAFE, HECS relief and more. And how many of these policies were opposed and remain opposed by those opposite? Those opposite who continue to come in here and talk about cost of living concerns, but at the same time voting against or arguing against cost of living relief measures that the government is putting in place. Well, we know, unlike the Liberals and Nationals, that cost of living relief matters to Australians, and we are determined to continue to deliver responsible relief to Australians.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Walsh, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and I thank the minister for that response. Can the minister please explain to the Senate how the Albanese Labor government's recent announcement that it will fund a 15% wage increase for early childhood education and care workers will help workers with the cost of living and also assist families?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Wong.
Thank you. And can I make the point that Senator Walsh, as a leader in her union for so many years, is one of a number of leaders for whom the early childhood education and care workers' pay and conditions has been such a priority, and she and others on this side of the chamber should feel very proud of the work they have done both outside and inside the parliament to deliver, work with workers seeking these pay increases and to deliver them through government. This is a 15% relief increase which brings together a set of priorities that are important to the Albanese Labor government. Real help with the cost of living, fair wages for workers, investing in the future and economic equity for women. It will be phased in over 2 years, and from December this year there will be a 10% increase. This means a typical educator will receive a pay rise of $103 per week.
Has expired. Senator Walsh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. Can the minister please inform the Senate why the Albanese Labor government's policies are in the best interests of all Australians and how we are focused on delivering plans that lead to lower power prices, lower grocery prices and lower housing prices?
Thank you, Senator Walsh. Minister Wong. Order.
Well, can I finish what I was going to say first about early childhood education workers? As I said, a typical educator paid at the award rate will receive a pay rise of at least $103 per week. The wage increase will be tied to a commitment from centres to limit fee increases, a very important condition that will keep downward pressure on fees for families. And unlike Mr Dutton's team, including Senator Rennick, those of us on this side of the chamber understand the value of early childhood education and care, and what I would venture to say is so does the Australian community. So does the Australian community. When it comes to cost of living relief, well, what we know is the Liberals and Nationals oppose it every chance they get. They voted 48 times against industrial relations laws to get wages moving, 6 times in the Senate to stop cheaper medicine. On cheaper childcare, Senator Hume said it's certainly not the policy we would have introduced. They voted against energy price relief, social housing and fee-free TAFE.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, last week the RBA confirmed that struggling Australian households should not expect a rate cut in interest rates this year. The RBA's chief economist told the Senate Cost of Living Committee last week that the board needed to see softer growth in public spending before it could cut rates. But I understand that the Labor government's spending has increased by $315 billion, and in response the RBA has more than doubled its forecast for government spending. Why are you making decisions that are keeping interest rates higher for longer and costing Australian families who are already doing it tough?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Hume for the question, and I'm pleased that Senator Hume used the figure of $315 billion, because, as Senator Hume would know, that a significant component of that is automatic indexation for pensions. So I presume so you're going to cut pensions, are you? So you're going to cut pensions. There we have it. There we have it. Pensions are going to be cut. Senator Hume has just confirmed that pensions will be cut. Order. Well, I wasn't expecting that, but Senator Hume has now confirmed that that is their approach. So, well, in that $315 billion there are investments in Medicare, so that's going to be cut too, I presume. The energy bill relief, the money that we're putting in to ensure that childcare costs are cheaper. Childcare costs have come down 11% with our investment. Are they going to be cut? This is where you can't talk out both sides of your mouth like they do every single day. They complain about spending, but they won't explain what they are going to cut if they got given the chance. And as the RBA Governor said last week, when she confirmed that we were doing the job we needed to do and they were doing the job they needed to do, well, let me quote from you, if you hadn't heard, when the bank governor said, governments have a job to do and I have a job to do. My job and the Reserve Bank's job is to get inflation down. Governments have a different job. Their job is to get inflation down, and they acknowledge that, but it's also to provide services and infrastructure for the Australian people, unless, of course, you have a Liberal government, in which case you cut those services and infrastructure. She goes on to say, and so they need to do that at the same time as they need to focus on keeping inflation down. Here it is. So my personal view is that they are doing what they can do in that area, and I am doing what I can do in that area.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hume, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. The Prime Minister last week said his policies would put downward pressure on inflation. But the RBA's chief economist told the Senate Cost of Living Committee, in terms of being a sustained return to target, that's not something we can see coming from those particular policies. Does the government accept the advice of the RBA's chief economist?
Thank you, Senator Hume. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I think it's all covered in the statement on monetary policy, when the bank does acknowledge that headline inflation will, with energy bill price relief, will put downward pressure on headline inflation. But underlying inflation, which is what the Shadow Treasurer has focused on and says it's the more important measure, has moderated for 6 consecutive quarters. 6 consecutive annual quarters we have seen moderation in underlying inflation. And if those opposite cross and losing their mind over inflation with a 3 in front of it, imagine how furious they must have been at themselves when it had a 6 in front of it. Imagine. At the point that government was handed over, inflation had a 6 in front of it, and you had a budget which spent $40 billion. They are the measures, they're the decisions you took when inflation was the highest. You went on a spending spree.
The time has expired. Senator Hume, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Last week, the ABS confirmed that the cost of living had increased for working Australian households by 6.2% in the last year alone. Since the election, real disposable income has fallen by 7.8% per person. The cost of living is skyrocketing under this government. Why is Labor relying on spin and tricks during this cost of living crisis? Why don't you have a plan to sustainably reduce inflation?
Order. Order. Senator Wong. Senator Watt. Sorry. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Inflation is moderating. It continues to moderate. That is what the bank says in their statement on monetary policy. It's what the Treasury forecasts say. And in terms of, again, talking out both sides of your mouth from the opposition, not wanting to spend, but then saying what's your actual plan? Tax cuts for every taxpayer. We've halved inflation since coming to government. We've got records job growth. We've doubled wages growth. And do you know what? And this one must really hurt those opposite. We've turned significant Liberal deficits into 2 Labor surpluses. That is what we are doing. The bank has acknowledged that running surplus budgets are helping in the putting downward pressure on inflation. We inherited inflation with a 6 in front of it. Not every taxpayer was getting a tax cut, and we have turned all that around, and we are delivering surpluses at the same time.
Senator Cox.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. Come on down. Minister, your government promised to implement the Statement from the Heart, the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, when elected in 2022, and have been pursuing this in opposition for many years before. For the past 2 years, this government, led by the Prime Minister, have attended the annual Garma Festival in the Northern Territory, telling not just the Australian people but First Nations people that they will support a Makarrata Commission as part of this commitment. Why did the Prime Minister just a fortnight ago change this approach, whitewash and water down the important concept of Makarrata, the Yolngu word that has been gifted to the nation, to say that it just means coming together in a struggle after a struggle?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Cox for the question, my very first as the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Thank you, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more to come. Yes, Garma was an important weekend for not only the Prime Minister but also the previous Minister for Indigenous Australians, Linda Burney, who I also would like to commend for her work and her energy in terms of improving the lives for Indigenous people. It was good to attend Garma with both her and the Prime Minister, and our commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart is very much a strong commitment, President. We remain firm, Senator Cox, in terms of the principles.
Order. Please continue, Minister.
We remain committed to the principles of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, voice, treaty,
Order.
truth. And we were the ones, under our Prime Minister, who kept that commitment and went to the referendum. So, going to Garma, President, was the opportunity to be with the people, unlike members opposite, who were certainly invited to be a part of that, and to come together with the Yolngu people, but also most First Nations people who did travel there for the weekend. And we saw that as an opportunity to reset, regroup, regather, and that's precisely what we were doing. Listening to First Nations people. Unlike those opposite, people were really hurt by the outcome of the referendum, and this was our opportunity to meet with them. First Nations people who largely voted yes, Senator Henderson, across our communities in Northern Australia. It mattered. It still matters. And as the CEO of the Yothu Yindi Foundation, Denise Bowden, said, it was so
Thank you, Minister.
shattering.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Cox, for order. Order. Across the chain. Senator McKenzie. Senator McKenzie, when I call order, that includes you. I have Senator Cox on her feet. Senator Cox, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, pre-election in 2022, your Labor conference adopted Makarrata as a policy. It was pre-costed at $27.7 million, and you even put $5.8 million in the 2022 budget to commence work on establishing an independent Makarrata Commission to oversee processes for agreement-making and truth-telling. Why is this Labor government now, particularly the Prime Minister, breaking this election promise to the Australian people and gaslighting First Nations people about this election promise?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Let me be very clear to the Senate. There is certainly no gaslighting going on in terms of this discussion, and there certainly is great sincerity by the Prime Minister and this government in terms of our relationships with First Nations people. There is none of that going on, Senator Cox. And in fact, if anything, we knew from listening to the people at Garma that we had to keep going in this space. What was disappointing, President, was while we were there, the opposition leader chose to use that time, instead of appearing at Garma where he had been invited, he chose that time to say no to Makarrata. He said no to the voice. And we learned from that experience that unless there is bipartisan support, that hurt.
Minister McCarthy, please resume your seat. Senator Wong. Order. Senator Cash, I have called you to order. Not you personally, but I am now calling you personally to order. Minister McCarthy.
And we certainly learnt, unless there is bipartisan support, it's very difficult to pursue.
Time. Thank you, Minister. Senator Cox, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, the Prime Minister in the media interview at Garma this year both reneged and walked back this commitment on not just the policy, the budget line item and the promise. Will your government commit to supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart's Makarrata Commission as scripted in 2017, accept the terms in which it needed to be implemented in full, and stop denying First Nations people justice in this country by supporting the development of formal truth-telling agreement-making in an independent Makarrata Commission?
Thank you, Senator Cox. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Senator Cox, we are supportive of your bill before the Senate in terms of an inquiry to consult across the country, and that in itself will certainly indicate to this parliament and this Senate, and certainly to this government, the impact that having such a commission could possibly have. But as I said in the previous response, we learnt from the referendum and the pain and hardship that that created to First Nations people in this country was the fact that there was no bipartisan support. And we will not endeavour down that pathway without the support of the opposition. The opposition leader made it very clear on that weekend that he was not going to do that. And so that makes that pathway very difficult to tread.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Green.
Thanks, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. We know that many Australians are doing it tough right now, and that is why our budget focused on providing cost of living relief to all Australians whilst putting downward pressure on inflation. Can the Minister please outline cost of living relief that was in the budget, and what further costs of living measures has the government taken to support Australians since the 1st of July?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Green for that question and for the opportunity to update the Senate again about the measures that the government is taking to ensure that we're providing as much cost of living relief as we can, whilst also tackling the inflation challenge in the economy. So in the budget we had tax cuts for every taxpayer, not just some. We had energy bill relief for households and small businesses that will start rolling out now. We're backing a third consecutive pay rise for Australia's 2.6 minimum low-paid workers, those that rely on the minimum wage. We've invested more into Medicare and, of course, into cheaper medicines, making it cheaper for people to buy those medicines, and particularly for people who are on long-term medications. Waiving $3 billion in university debt for more than 3 million Australians, increasing rent assistance for nearly 1 million households, Of course, and importantly, and something that many on this side of the chamber have lobbied for, paying super on paid parental leave so that women, predominantly women, when they take that PPL, are not penalised further for time out of the paid workforce. Extending the deeming rates freeze for 876,000 income support recipients and getting a fairer deal for consumers at the supermarket checkout. The numbers also show that we are managing the economy better than the coalition ever did. We've delivered back-to-back surpluses. We've got gross debt will peak 9.7% lower than what the opposition forecast, and because we worked hard to reduce that debt, Australians will pay $80 billion less in interest costs. We've slashed the coalition's spending growth. Inflation remains a challenge, but is less than half its peak and is much lower than the 6.1% we inherited at the election. Wage growth is almost double, and Australians now have a government that supports wages growth through the Fair Work Commission processes, and we've created nearly 930,000 jobs since the election.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Green, first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Minister. The Albanese government respects and values the work of our early childhood educators, caring for our children and making sure they get the best start in life. Under Labor's pay rise, childcare workers will, on average, have $107 more in their pay packet each week. Can the Minister please outline how this initiative will also save money for parents who have kids in childcare?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Green, and maybe a little bit of self-interest there for someone with real-life experience of having a little one in early childhood education and care. But we were very pleased last week to announce our investment in early childhood educators, in ensuring that they are paid properly, but also importantly that those increased wage costs that come with that aren't going to be footed by parents around this country. They're already paying a significant amount for their children to be in these centres, and so it was important that government provide further assistance. Now, this ensures that that highly feminised workforce, over 90% of the workers in that workforce are women, and no surprise that it's been underpaid and undervalued for too long. This addresses that, but also puts a cap on the increases that centres can charge parents, because we don't want parents footing the bill for these additional investments.
Thank you. Senator Green, second supplementary.
Well, thanks, Minister. Like you and others on this side, I am so proud to be part of a government so focused on early childhood education and care. Can the Minister please outline why the government has been so focused on cost of living relief, and what would be the impact on Australians if the government had taken a slash-and-burn approach to the budget?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Green for that question and for the opportunity to imagine what it could have been like if you didn't have a government that was serious about tackling inflation, but also at the same time ensuring that we're providing the services and investments that our community needs. So that's why the tax cuts going to every taxpayer were important. It's why our jobs growth has been such an important part. More people in work earning good money. Wages growth. That's why we've pushed so hard for improvements in wages growth and in aged care and childcare, those highly feminised industries, underpaid for too long. We are addressing that. And based on what those opposite have told us, we would have had lower pensions. Pensioners would have had to pay. We would have definitely had higher power prices. We know that because they didn't support energy bill relief. We would have had people paying higher taxes, particularly those on middle and lower incomes would have been paying higher taxes, and there would have been lower wages. So those three things together: higher power, lower wages and higher taxes.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Attorney-General, and I believe it may be Senator Murray-Watt. Officers of the Australian Federal Police are the lowest paid in Australia. A constable in the Western Australian Police Force makes a minimum of $83,000 a year, while their equivalent in the AFP makes less than $70,000. A sergeant in Victoria's Police Force makes a minimum of $123,000, while their equivalent in the AFP makes under $103,000. Given their unique and critical role in national security, not to mention a national cost of living crisis, why has the government allowed pay for AFP officers to remain the lowest in Australia?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Hanson. At the outset, I want to recognise on behalf of the government that we really deeply value the important work that AFP officers do every day to keep our community safe. Obviously, they play a particular role around this parliament and in some cases with individual members of this parliament, but more generally they do extremely important work to keep our community safe. As everyone is aware, there are negotiations going on at the moment in relation to a new enterprise bargaining agreement with the Australian Federal Police Services, and I do recognise the right of all employees to take responsible and legally appropriate protected action where that's allowed for under the law, to the extent that those actions are safe and do not cause disruption or affect community safety and national security. The reality is that, as in so many other parts of the workforce, some of the issues surrounding the wages and conditions that are experienced by AFP officers are a legacy of 10 years of a coalition government. We have seen that the case across the public sector workforce, and unfortunately the coalition's policy of keeping low wages in place applied to the AFP as it did to various other employees of the federal government. I'm confident that the Attorney-General, Minister Dreyfus, is handling this role appropriately, and I'm certainly very hopeful that we can achieve an agreement with the AFP officers as soon as possible. That would obviously be in everyone's interest. I note that the AFP is committed to ensuring operational continuity and community safety at all times, and we certainly have confidence in the AFP to approach these negotiations in that spirit. And as I say, we're confident that before too long we will be able to get an agreement reached.
Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Minister, in 22-23 the attrition rate for the AFP was 6.3%. This is extremely high for a police force. A survey by the AFP Association found 92% of officers don't have the necessary resources to cope with their workloads or the stresses of a job that sees them deal with matters like international paedophile syndicates. Training these officers in some specialist roles like child protection can take years and a significant taxpayer investment, which is lost to us when an officer leaves the AFP. Will the government consider offering
Senator Hanson, your time for asking the question has expired. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Hanson. While I don't have the details in front of me, I'm sure that already a pay rise has been offered to AFP services as part of these negotiations. Of course, that hasn't been accepted, as is the case often during negotiations, and I recognise that the result of the vote for the proposed AFP enterprise agreement was announced on the 3rd of June, with the majority of voting AFP members voting no to the AFP's enterprise agreement offer. It was obviously a matter for each AFP member to decide their own position on the offer, and I respect the decision of AFP officers in that vote. I'm sure that the AFP and the government will both continue productive negotiations with bargaining representatives and the involved unions. Certainly, from the government's point of view, we're very keen to conduct this bargaining in good faith, and I'm sure the AFP do as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Thank you. Well, 68% of officers told the survey they would leave the force unless a better offer was made. Now, officers of the AFP are planning industrial action in Canberra to demand recognition that they are not desk-bound public servants able to enjoy flexible work-from-home provisions in exchange for a lower 11.2% pay rise. They deserve better deal. Your IR Relations Bill is same pay, same work, same pay. Will you
thank you, Senator
do the same
Hanson.
for the
Your
AFP?
time for asking the question has expired. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Hanson. And as Senator Green points out, I'm glad you recognise that the government passed laws that were referred to as same job, same pay. And my recollection is that you voted against those laws, Senator Hanson. So it's very interesting now that you're calling on us to follow a principle that you were not prepared to follow for any worker. Senator Hanson, you were not prepared to follow that principle for any worker, whether it be police officers in the AFP, whether it be coal miners in central Queensland or any other worker who is experiencing that issue. Of course, Australian federal police officers have every right to negotiate, to take whatever action they wish to in line with those laws that we passed. But as I say, we very much respect the work that AFP officers do each and every day. It is dangerous work, it is important work, and that is why the government has put forward an offer which has been rejected by AFP officers, but I'm confident that those negotiations will continue constructively.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash.
Thank you very much. And my question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. During the election campaign, Prime Minister Albanese said, "I'll tell you what I'll be doing is this. If I ever do make a mistake, I'll put my hand up, I'll own it, I'll take responsibility and I'll set about fixing it." Will the Prime Minister now be true to his word and apologise to the Australian people for his disastrous mistake in abolishing the ABCC and giving effective control of the construction sector in Australia to his union mates in the CFMEU, which has allowed bribery, corruption, bullying, intimidation, violence and criminal activity to flourish on our nation's construction sites?
Thank you, Senator Cash. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, one thing, there are a few things in life we can always count on. Sunrise, sunset, Senator Cash having a go about trade unions. Yep. Order. Senator Cash, you tell me not to be...
Minister Wong. Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, you've asked your question. I'm going to ask you to listen in silence. And Senator McKenzie, you will listen in silence as well. Minister Wong.
Thank you. And I know that the Senator always likes to come in here and talk about trade unions and make a whole range of allegations. We've seen that. Well, I have.
Order. Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, I specifically asked you to listen in silence. I would ask that you respect the orders that I give. Minister Wong, please continue.
Thank you. But the truth is, this government is taking the strongest possible action to clean up the CFMEU. We believe that criminals and bikies have no place in the trade union movement. They certainly, apart from being...
Order. Order. Order on my right as well. Minister, please continue.
Well, how about you take responsibility for this? Every allegation was occurring while your ABCC was there. Why don't you take responsibility for that? It's an inconvenient truth, isn't it? Inconvenient truth. But the truth is these allegations are disturbing and they require urgent action. And the legislation before the chamber is about ensuring that action is taken. That is why, and I know that Senator Cash, whether it's on work choices or on industrial relations laws more generally, or on the construction union, will always look to make a political point rather than actually ensure the outcome is achieved. And the outcome that needs to be achieved is the cleaning up of the CFMEU. That is the outcome that needs to be achieved. And that is what this government and this minister will be doing, while you are failing to recall what you did in government and you failed to do the right thing.
Senator Hanson, first supplementary. I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Senator Cash. First supplementary.
Thank you. And given the fact that you and the Prime Minister are still clearly, based on that answer, in denial about the consequences of your actions in abolishing the ABCC, why should the Australian people trust your government to clean up the CFMEU, particularly given your government has spent the last 2 years giving them everything they want?
Just a moment, Senator Wong. Senator McKenzie, I specifically asked you during the last question to listen in silence. You completely ignored that direction. I'm going to ask again. I expect the chamber to listen in silence. Minister Wong.
Peddling inaccuracies does not make them correct, Senator.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Cash, when I asked for silence in the chamber, I'm not sure which part of that statement you think didn't apply to you. It does apply to you. I'm asking you to listen in silence. Minister Wong.
I again say peddling inaccuracies, as that question was replete with, does not make them true. Since the abolition of the ABCC, the number of days lost to industrial disputes has fallen by 30%. The reality is the ABCC was ineffective and a waste of taxpayers' money, a disaster for productivity in the sector, and it did little to address the exploitation of workers, something you don't like to listen to, do you? Senator Cash, when was the last time you actually stood up and talked about the exploitation of workers? When was the last time you actually talked about the exploitation of workers? We want safe, fair workplaces for all Australians. That is what we want. We are determined to clean up the CFMEU. The allegations which occurred on your watch are disturbing. They need to be resolved, and Senator Watt is focused on doing so.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cash, second supplementary.
Former Minister Tony Burke left behind a disaster in the Australian construction sector because of his CFMEU-friendly legislation.
Order.
Yet instead of sacking him, the Prime Minister promoted him over Mr Watt. Minister Watt, isn't it clear that the Prime Minister values supporting his financial donors at the CFMEU above genuine ability?
Thank you, Minister Cash. Order. 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 I'm waiting to call order across the chamber. Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, there was a lot in that. There's certainly a lot of assertions. I found it difficult to follow the sequence of them. And I do find it interesting that Senator Cash is so sensitive about any comment in response to her, but is very happy to attack other people personally. You know? Very happy to focus on other people personally. Now, I'm not quite sure what the question was, to be honest, between Mr Burke and Minister Watt. But what I'd say to you is this, Senator. We are taking a very principled approach to this. We want safe workplaces for all Australians. We do not believe your political focus on the ABCC is warranted when you look at the facts. And what I would say to you, Senator Cash, if you really care about fixing this up, then pass the legislation. But I can almost guarantee, because it's Senator Cash and the opposition, that they will go for stunts and posturing over actually making sure that this is cleaned up.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Gallagher. Defence Housing Australia, a government agency of which you are a shareholder, Minister, has been reported to have breached their federal environmental approval at Lee Point in Darwin, clearing ancient woodlands, making up a wildlife corridor for 260 of Australia's bird species, including 400-year-old trees. Locals in Darwin are horrified that this has happened, and they want action. This space is precious to the locals in the area, and they want government action. What action has your government done in relation to these breaches?
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Hanson-Young for the question. And I note she has asked me a series of questions on this at estimates as well. And I undertook following that exchange to make further inquiries and to go and visit Lee Point in the Northern Territory, which I have done. I understand, and the shareholders have written to the chairperson of Defence Housing Australia, reminding that the board about our expectations in relation to activities at Lee Point development. We understand, and I think I am advised, that it wasn't conditions of the Commonwealth EPBC Act. They have complied with the EPBC Act at every stage of the development. However, there was an issue, I think, with the Northern Territory Department's planning conditions for Stage 3, and that is the one where, whilst the contractor was asked not to start clearing that area was cleared or commenced to be cleared. Work was stopped, and DHA has appointed an external investigator to examine the shortfalls in its own processes and really how that happened on the approvals that were actually, I think it was a matter from the Northern Territory government. I did go out and visit the site, and I walked around the site. Obviously, there is a lot of development, housing development, up to the point where DHA's development is going ahead. So it is an area where there is already housing development. And I would also say I asked a number of stakeholders in the Northern Territory about that development. There is also a lot of support for this development because of the housing shortage in the NT and the need to expand on supply of housing. So I accept that it's controversy in some areas, but there's also some significant support.
Senator Hanson-Young, first supplementary.
Thank you. I would put to the minister that you can build houses without knocking down 400-year-old trees. And you can do this in areas where there is not the sensitivity of that environment. I would ask the minister—
Senator Hanson-Young, please resume your seat. Order across the chamber. Order. I'm still waiting for order. Senator Hanson-Young, please continue.
Thank you. I would ask the minister to investigate the allegations that Stage 5 has bulldozed 400-year-old trees outside of approval under EPBC.
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Minister.
Look, I am happy to follow that up. I understood that the issues related to a different stage of the development, but I will follow that up in relation to Stage 5. I also directly asked the Managing Director of DHA, Mr Jackson, about whether or not any 400-year-old trees had been bulldozed, and the answer I was given was no, that none had. And so I am happy to go back on that as well. I would note that under the Minister for Environment there have been further conditions put on this development, another buffer for the Gouldian finch habitat, some further conditions around invasive grass, ensuring that I think there's an extra 37 hectares of additional reserve at Lee Point, and the Northern Territory Government has also subsequently created a 1,500-hectare national park around there. So there is additional safeguards.
Thank you, Minister. The time
there is
for
housing
answering has expired. Senator Hanson-Young, second supplementary.
Thank you. The minister has referenced the Environment Minister's role in this. Australia's environment laws are clearly not up to scratch. They can't even protect the environment from the government's own bulldozers. The laws are broken. They need to be fixed. When will your government act?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, the Minister for Environment has been working on reforms to environment laws. We have also been resourcing the department so that it can actually deal with the approvals and requirements of different applications so that those aren't getting stalled and they can be considered. And we have been dealing with Nature Positive Act in this place, I think, for the first stage of it, and there are more to come, as Senator Hanson-Young knows. And we will keep talking with stakeholders to refine that legislation and ensure that the laws are as robust as they can be. On the issues about the Defence Housing Authority's role in Lee Point, I have not had Stage 5 raised with me, so I will undertake to go back and have a look at what Stage 5 have. But we have balanced improved responses under the Nature Positive laws to ensure that there are protections, but at the same time this development will provide 800 new homes in Darwin.
Has expired. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the new Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. Can the minister explain what this government is doing to improve the life outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and closing the gap outcomes? Can the new minister outline the government's key priorities?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Stewart, for your question. I certainly am, as I said previously, deeply honoured to be the new Minister for Indigenous Australians, taking the baton from the Honourable Linda Burney MP. It was certainly wonderful to walk beside her throughout our many years, actually, 8 years together, with her as our in opposition shadow minister, but then the minister in the last couple of years, and also the former Senator Pat Dodson, a terrific duo to have worked with. It was at Garma that Denise Bowden from the Yothu Yindi Foundation used the word soul-crushing, President, for the people who worked so hard in the referendum campaign. And we know that the Gumatj leaders commended the Prime Minister for his courage in taking forward the referendum and they gave him the sacred Ganini. It is a source of strength and power. That ceremony that took place at Gulkala was the first time it was publicly shown in terms of the Prime Minister, and it was about the strength of power that he had to take this forward. He had made a commitment, and they thanked him for that. As Jawa Yunupingu said at Gama, we do look forward and not back. And that's what I will be doing, working hard to move forward together. We will work in partnership with First Nations communities and organisations and state and territory governments to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians have the same opportunities and life outcomes as our fellow Australians. While in Gama, the PM outlined economic development as a key priority because it's through being able to participate in the economy that we will create better futures. We signed a new partnership agreement with the Northern Territory Government and the Yothi Yindi Foundation, investing $20 million from the Aboriginal Benefits Account to build the Gama Institute, a new tertiary and vocational education centre owned and run by the Yolngu. This builds on our new school funding commitment to the NT signed by Minister Clare.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Work across the parliament on closing the gap to address the disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians across health, education, jobs, housing and justice and so many more areas is so important. What steps has the minister taken in her first few weeks as minister to ensure that this happens?
Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Well, I certainly reached out to First Nations organisations across the country, President. It all did happen very quickly, so there was a fair bit of work and still ongoing work, obviously. But one of the most key important aspects for me is this parliament and reaching out to cross-party, both in the Senate and the House, to close the gap. Those targets, certainly the data that came out last Friday, showed again that we are not reducing the incarceration rates, we are not reducing the out-of-home care rates, and we are not able to see the slowdown of suicide. In fact, we're seeing way too many suicides. And I do thank the members and senators who met with me this morning as my first task in this parliament to be able to speak with you about closing the gap. We had senators and members from across the aisle, and I do thank those who are unable to appear this morning, but I will be in touch with them over coming days.
Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. The government has said it's committed to the principles of Makarrata and truth-telling. Can the minister provide an update on the government's approach?
Minister McCarthy.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Stewart. And I know that you're incredibly passionate about all of these issues, and we do remain firmly committed to the principles of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. There are a variety of views on how to move forward, and it is important the next steps bring people together. We saw what happens when people do not walk together in the issue and the area of First Nations people. Already important treaty and truth-telling work is underway at the state and territory level. In Victoria, we're seeing the progress being made by the First Peoples Assembly and the important work of the Europe Justice Commission. In South Australia, work of the historic South Australian Voice to Parliament is well underway. As I travel this country and talk to First Nations people, I am humbled that despite everything we've been through, both historically and more recently, there is a great determination and resilience to keep going. We are a resilient people, and we are strong and determined to keep going, but we want to do it together.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. I thought it was someone else. I think it's Minister McCarthy. Recent revelations show CFMEU-controlled construction projects cost around 30% more. Australian taxpayers are being forced to pay more to deliver congestion-busting, productivity-enhancing and life-saving infrastructure than they should as a result of state Labor government's sweetheart deals with the CFMEU. Other critically important projects are being left unfunded as a result of costs and delays and overruns for existing projects. Minister, has Minister King asked her department for advice on the powers available to her to ensure taxpayer funds for the construction of public infrastructure projects have not been misappropriated or spent on unlawful activity, given the recent revelations about the CFMEU?
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. As Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and I thank Senator Mackenzie for her question. We certainly have been on the record to say that the behaviour we have seen from the construction division of the CFMEU is unacceptable. We've seen Senator Watt introduce a bill this morning. We have zero tolerance for this behaviour and have taken the strongest action possible, President, to eliminate it through appointing independent administrators. Across government, we have supported the Fair Work Commission in appointing independent administrators to the construction division of the CFMEU. We've asked the Fair Work Ombudsman to undertake a targeted review of all enterprise agreements made by the Victorian branch of the construction division of the CFMEU
Minister, that
apply to big build.
Senator Mackenzie.
Point of order relevance, direct relevance, Madam President. It was a simple question about the infrastructure funding from the Commonwealth Government to state government and the procurement of CFMEU-controlled projects.
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. I was going to go to the question, but I'll take
if
your
I may
point
make
of
a
order.
submission, thank you.
Minister
On the
Wong?
point of order, the senator in her question also made a set of political assertions. The minister is entirely able to respond to the assertions in relation to the CFMEU.
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie.
On Senator Wong's point, on my point of order, I'm happy to submit the preference of my questions to actual fact check. They are not political
Senator
statements.
Mackenzie, that is a debating point. Your question had a considerable amount of preamble, which the order. There was considerable preamble to your question, and the minister is being directly relevant. Minister McCarthy, please continue.
Thank you, President. Well, I was getting to it, Senator Mackenzie. The minister has introduced new requirements on states and territories as part of its funding agreement on infrastructure and reinforced assurances on Commonwealth projects. Where the Commonwealth is jointly funding projects with states and territories, the minister has written to state and territory counterparts to convey the expectation that any information regarding improper or criminal conduct by entities related to projects delivered under the National Land Transport Act 2014 be reported immediately to the relevant regulator. The minister has also embedded new assurances and protections in the Federation funding agreement that the Commonwealth has negotiated with the states, which was finalised on August 11. The FFA outlines the states and territories' responsibility to ensure value for money for public funds, engage delivery partners who prioritise ethical practices, and the shared responsibility to support initiatives to improve productivity in construction. The new FFAS responds to findings from the Independent Strategic Review and the Independent Review of the National Partnership Agreement, which the minister undertook in response to the irresponsible and unsustainable spending occurring under the previous government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Mackenzie, first supplementary.
Yes. In the May budget, the government allocated $10.1 billion to pay states more money for infrastructure cost blowouts. This included an extra $5 billion to Victoria alone, with not one additional kilometre of road upgraded as a result. How much of these infrastructure cost blowouts are attributable to CFMEU-controlled project overruns?
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Minister McCarthy.
Well, Senator Mackenzie, if there is one group responsible for cost increases and project delays in this country, it is the Liberals and Nationals.
Yes.
They spent a decade making oversized and undercooked infrastructure commitments across the country. They started building inland rail.
Minister, please resume your seat. Please resume your seat. Order. 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 Minister, please continue. Minister McCarthy, please continue.
Sorry. Building costs have been increasing for a range of reasons, including a shortage of skilled labour and the increasing price of building materials due to supply chain issues. Wages and enterprise bargaining agreements are not the key driver for inflation in this country.
Senator Mackenzie, second supplementary.
Protection racket continues. Minister, can you provide a guarantee to Parliament that no Commonwealth infrastructure funds have been spent unlawfully by the CFMEU or CFMEU-affiliated persons?
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Minister McCarthy.
Senator Mackenzie, the minister is looking at all these matters and seeking advice.
Thank you. Minister Wong.
I ask that further questions be placed on notice.